I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, November 15th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, real data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Looking at significant wave heights in the North Pacific Ocean, we see a gale pushing into Vancouver Island in British Columbia, producing 28-foot seas and higher seas previous to that, just mere 12 hours ago, possibly offering some support for swell pushing down the U.S. West Coast, and another gale developing just west of the dateline over the North Dateline region, producing 26-foot seas, but mainly aimed to the north. Let's get into the details. As usual, we start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales. When they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet to the south, like right there, and that dip there helps set up a counterclockwise flow aloft and down at the surface, and that is the hallmark of low pressure. And if that low is deep enough or low enough, it creates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough, generate seas, and seas, if they're high enough, eventually turn into swell and produce surf when they hit your beach. All right, so we have a trough here in the, we'll call it the northwestern Gulf of Alaska, being fed by 170 knot winds, offering a little bit of support for gale development. There's also another trough, a much broader trough here off of Japan and the Kuril Islands, also offering a little bit of hope, but notice that most of the winds are over in the southeast quadrant of the trough. That would mainly promote fetch going up towards Alaska, where this trough here, most of its energy is falling south, and that in turn would promote a low pressure system with most of its wind energy pointed to the southeast. All right, so that is as of right now. We get into Monday, the trough continues, but notice it's really pinched off, and that makes it kind of difficult. It needs to be more open, wider area to support gale development, but we'll give it a little bit of hope. Also notice there's the opposite of the trough, a ridge here over the U.S. West Coast. That helps set up a clockwise flow aloft and down the surface, and that is the sign of high pressure. And high pressure has certainly been in control over the U.S. West Coast for quite a while now. All right, so that's as of Monday. Then we get into Monday night and Tuesday. Notice all of a sudden the trough starts looking a little bit better organized in the Gulf. Not great, but broader at least. Wind's not as strong feeding it. Another sort of a split pattern thing starts developing over Japan. That's not good for gale development, but there is a trough that sets up off Kamchatka. So we get into Tuesday, offering some hope. Go into Wednesday, same deal, a very weak trough off the British Columbia coast on Wednesday, and this trough over in the far northwest Pacific pushes up into the Bering Sea, and we continue with this sort of split jet stream flow. You see one branch there, one branch down there, and then it actually backtracks. I mean, not even sure this really constitutes a trough in the Gulf of Alaska Wednesday night. We continue into Thursday, and then we see a new trough developing here in the northwestern Gulf of Alaska, being fed by, what was that, about 160 knot winds, offering some hope. Also notice the jet over central California. That means potential for precipitation. Anyway, the trough continues into the Gulf of Alaska, kind of pinched off. Still a broad area of winds as we get into Saturday, and then building even more as we get into Sunday, but displaced well to the north with kind of a ridge under it, so maybe some hope way up in the northern Gulf. And again, even at a week from now, the jet trying to organize, trying to consolidate across the Pacific, but just not quite having enough wind energy. At least this is a better setup than we were kind of thinking for this time of year, given the presence of La Nina. Let's go take a look down at the surface, see the effect of these upper level winds on the lower level circulation. Here we are, surface level pressure, surface level winds. We know we have a trough right here, but there's not there's low pressure there, high pressure there, but not doing a whole lot. Then we know there's that broad trough off here, and that's doing much better. 45 knot winds developing aimed southeast off of Kamchatka. Possibly good, and then continuing 45 knots into Monday, and then fading. A new sort of low of some sort develops off the California coast, quickly lifting north most of its fetch, all aimed up at British Columbia. Very little on the backside of this, 30-knot winds. Good for wind swell into California just because it's so close to the coast. New trough, new low tries to develop off of Kamchatka as we get into Tuesday, but it quickly gets pushed up into the Bering Sea. Some amount of fetch south of the Aleutian Islands, still at 35 knots, offering some potential, and even that gets kind of weird. Then a new trough, new low tries to develop here in the northwestern Gulf as we get into Thursday. Broad fetch of 30-knot winds. Again, that's good for, 18-foot seas, maybe 20-foot seas if you're lucky. Continuing into Friday, no clearly organized strong weather systems, just kind of this generic 30-35 knot easterly flow pushing over. Is that easterly? Yes, that is to the east, westerly winds to the east as we get into Sunday. There we go. Maybe some potential for some sort of swell development, but no clearly well-defined, lumbering, big winter-type storms, at least not yet in the forecast. Let's take a look at the effect of those winds on the ocean surface, but we're going back in time to Saturday because a little gale just popped up almost randomly off of, we'll call it the Pacific Northwest up into Vancouver Island. 18Z Saturday, what is that? 26-foot seas right there at 48.5 north, 140.5 west. That's 319-degree path into San Francisco, the hairy edge of the swell window. And then it sort of blew up on Saturday night, but it was outside of the San Francisco swell window. North of Point Reyes, though, is exposed. Seas belt to 41 feet almost into Sunday morning. Pushing onshore, there is weather pushing into British Columbia, snow in the higher elevations. That is a good thing, but that's not unexpected. It's typically during La Nina, there's a line somewhere between where the dry line is to the south and the weather is to the north. Typically, it's somewhere around, we'll say north of Cape Mendocino, somewhere along Oregon. Right now, it seems to be really focused into the Washington and British Columbia area. Anyway, as we get into, that was the hindcast. Let's go look at the forecast now. So here we are, current picture, that system moving onshore. New system developing as we saw over off of Kamchatka, North Kuril Islands right there. 32, maybe 33-foot seas. Building overnight to 35 feet and then fading by Monday. System pushing over the dateline in the North Dateline region, this area right here, and fading out. Good for small swell, little dribbles into Hawaii, a little bit more for the U.S. West Coast. Also, let's go take a look. That new broad low develops off of California, quickly racing north. You see even the arrows in here suggesting all the seas are directed to the northeast, not really at the coast, but certainly wind swell pushing in Tuesday and Wednesday. Another low develops in the Bering Sea, does nothing. Those islands, the Aleutians block everything, but still 22, 23-foot seas south of the Aleutians, and they try to organize a little bit more, continuing through the latter part of the week into the early part of the weekend. 21-foot seas over a broad area there, and that continues starts fading into Saturday, and then Sunday I think it rebuilds a bit. There you go, if you believe a model that far out. The general thought is, though, steady, we'll call it 11 to 13 second period swell into California, the Hawaiian Islands, more from a kind of oblique angle, not a direct feed, but some sort of swell looks possible. And then down south on Tuesday, the 10th of November, a small gale developed in the central South Pacific, building with 28, 29-foot seas mainly aimed off to the east, and a secondary system developed right behind with, about 32-foot seas, maybe 33-foot seas, all aimed off to the east. The point, and then out of the California swell window, the point being a little bit of small southern hemi swell probably will result, targeting mainly southern California and points south of there, if it's not completely masked by other swell coming from the north. But given the very north angle of the swells expected to be generated up in the Gulf, a lot of that's not going to make it into southern California. So this swell could arrive relatively unimpeded, expectation is, probably around midweek, the middle of this coming week for, we'll say, Southern California. Then we should add, after that, the Southern Hemi goes to sleep, and there's nothing believable expected after that. So that'd probably be the last Southern Hemi swell this season. All right, so we're looking. Normally we look at this chart for wind swell relative to California, Hawaii, but we're not doing that. What we're really looking for now is the presence of wind and high pressure, and whether that's going to be a function and or weather. We see this local low relative to California trades light for the Hawaiian Islands. A lighter wind regime on Monday, supposedly offshore for most of California until turning south as the low approaches the coast of North California. Then we get into Tuesday, south wind event. Probably pretty short-lived, though, down into, we'll say, Central California. And then continuing even into Wednesday, you can see the wind barbs, maybe from, we'll say, Half Moon Bay northward, some sort of south wind event. Nothing really expected other than trades for the Hawaiian Islands. Then we get into Thursday, a lighter wind regime. And then Friday, it looks like the wind machine is going to start kicking up. We might even end up with wind swell. That's driven by high pressure here pushing into the Great Basin, while that new broad low pressure system starts developing in the Gulf of Alaska. And I think that's kind of the tone even into Sunday of this next coming weekend. Yeah, maybe Sunday evening winds back off a little bit. But look at this. Major high pressure, major east wind event for the Hawaiian Islands. Easterly wind swell would be the expected result, and that is the end of that frame. So as we start the new week, we'll say Sunday into Monday, north winds along California, strong east trades into the Hawaiian Islands. Precip forecast for California. We're focusing solely on California. A little bit of rain up to Cape, in the Cape Mendocino down to Point Arena as we get into Sunday evening. That kind of fades out as a new low develops off the coast. This sky is actually forecast to produce a decent rain event down into the San Francisco Bay Area by about mid-Tuesday morning. Snow developing in the Tahoe area and getting pretty solid as we get into Tuesday night. Rain down to, we'll say, Morro Bay, down to Point Conception by Wednesday morning. Good solid snow for the Sierra if this materializes. And then slowly fading out, snow that is, into Tahoe on Wednesday. And then high and dry after that. We'll run this through another little front forecast moving into Cape Mendocino a week from now on Sunday. Not making it very far south, and that's the end of that. We know high pressure is to take over after that. Snow forecast dashboard, supposed snow accumulations for the Squaw area. We'll call this all basically the North Tahoe region up to about 34, 33 inches, all focused on the 18th. So what would that be like? The Tuesday, Wednesday event. Snow levels right down to, well, this is sort of slush here, pretty close to the base at Squaw, 6,000 feet, and many of the other resorts in Tahoe. Certainly the tops, plenty of freezing temperatures there. And then snow levels slowly rising from 6,000 feet up to, hovering somewhere around the 8,500 foot mark. A week out, and this is almost 10 days out here, or about 8 days, the 24th. So that, and then a little blip up to above the top of the resort, and then falling back down again into about the 75, I'll say the 8,000 foot range. Mammoth, given that they're much further south, much less snow expected. According to this, about 5 inches. Freezing level, the good news at Mammoth is their base is much higher. Still, even right now, base well above or well below the, or how do you say this? The freezing line well above the base and even the summit for the next couple of days, then falling down with the freezing line hovering somewhere near the base at Mammoth, which is about 8,000 feet, and then during the day peaking up above there a bit. All right, let's go take a look long term. What's going on with the Madden Julian oscillation, that periodic weather oscillation that traverses the planet on the equator, moving from west to east. When in the active phase, it's effectively a low pressure system. It feeds energy to the jet stream, helps promote storm development and swells, of course. And when in the inactive phase, does the exact opposite, promotes high pressure development and doesn't do a lot for storm production. And of course, the ENSO phase, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We clearly are in the La Nina phase, but the question is, how bad is it going to get, or how strong is La Nina going to get, and what's the effect on our weather long term? So first off, we look for wind, what the winds are doing on the equator. This is data from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator in the Pacific. This is the East Pacific here. This is the West Pacific here. That's New Guinea there. Dateline is right there. And the equator is right there. We're looking at the arrows, and their 5-day average winds. The stronger the arrows and the direction they're from tells you what the wind's doing. So strong out of the east over the East Pacific, strong out of the east over the Central Pacific, and then in the West Pacific, we call it the Kelvin wave generation area, because when the active phase of the MJO moves over the West Pacific, this is right in this area. If it's strong enough, it reverses trade winds and can actually take warm water that typically is in this area. See the red colors? That's water temperature. Start pushing it off to the east, not on the surface, but underneath the equator, like a bubble of warm water travels, takes like 3 months to make it across the Pacific, and then can erupt as it impacts Ecuador. If you get successive active phase of the MJO, if they're strong enough, and successive Kelvin waves, that can help usher in El Nino. We don't think that is going to happen anytime soon. We are well entrenched in a La Nina pattern, but we're keeping our eyes over here just the same. Right now, winds pretty solid out of the east, but it's not the actual winds, it's the difference from normal for this time of year. So right here, that's what this chart is. It says anomalies. Anomalies from normal. Winds right now, even though they're strong, they are a little bit stronger easterly than normal, also over the Central Pacific, and stronger yet again than normal in the West Pacific. So what we want to see is the active phase of the MJO would flip these arrows around and make them pointing from the west. We don't see any of that. So one can assume we are in the inactive phase of the MJO. Let's dig a little deeper. All right, what's the wind anomaly forecast? Are the winds going to be stronger from the east or stronger than normal from the west over the Pacific, and specifically in the Kelvin wave generation area? All right, this is the whole planet on one chart. A little bit hard to read, but the date line is at 180, right up there, and this is time over here. So you can see the blues are easterly anomalies. On the date line, you can see we've had a lot of blues, if not purples, suggestive of the inactive phase of the MJO. What we want to see is strong yellows and reds, but here in mid-October, they were all at 60 to, we'll say, 90 east. That's the Indian Ocean, and they are not budging. If anything, over the next week, here's the next 7 days, strong easterly anomalies are forecast. The Kelvin wave generation area starts right here and goes to right here. You can see in that box all purples, and in fact, easterly anomalies building southern or California is about 120 west. So even building on the equator to a point south of California, basically filling the entire Pacific Ocean with strong easterly anomalies. This is the exact opposite of what we want to see. But do recall, we looked at the wave models, the wind models. There is forecast to be some gale or fetch, ill-defined as it may be, but still something to produce some surf. So just because you see this doesn't mean there won't be surf, but if this wasn't here and they were westerly anomalies, the storms that are out there would probably be a lot stronger and produce a lot larger surf. So this sort of acts as a damper, limiting the amount of storm potential that could otherwise have developed. All right, looking further out, this is a 2-week model. This is a statistic model. It is outgoing long-wave radiation. Fancy words for the amount of sunlight reflecting off the ocean's surface. If you have more sunlight reflecting off the ocean surface, you don't have clouds. You have typically high pressure, and like that is this yellow-orange thing. A lot of positive anomalies. You see that there. Inactive phase of the MJO. active phase somewhere in the Indian Ocean, the blues. We want the blues over the Pacific. There's South America, Central America, Mexico, Hawaii, the equator right there. Date line right there. Kelvin wave generation area right here. This is the main area we're interested in. Inactive phase of the MJO per this the statistic model. Continuing 5 days out but getting a little weaker. Continuing 10 days out, a little weaker still. Persisting 2 weeks from now. So this sort of suggests inactive phase in control. Dynamic model, the Cfs model, basically saying exactly the same thing. A little bit of a variation, but no obvious support for energy injection into the jet stream by the active phase of the MJO to support storm development. If anything, the exact opposite. Energy stealing from the jet stream, hampering storm development. Here's phase diagrams. So a more detailed look at what the MJO is doing. This is the statistic model phase diagram. This is the dynamic model. So what are we doing? The circle here, imagine you're looking down on top of our planet at the North Pole, and the equator is out here around the edges of the chart. The MJO, active and inactive, move from west to east, from the Indian Ocean, over the maritime continent, over the West Pacific, East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, and over North Africa back to the Indian Ocean. Where the heavy dot is where the active phase of the MJO is. The inactive phase, one can assume, is on the exact opposite side of the chart. So if the active phase is here, and it's the closer the dot is to the circle, the weaker it is. So a very weak active phase today in the West Indian Ocean, forecast to move to, we'll say, the maritime continent, and even weaker still 2 weeks from now, with the inactive phase moving into the West Pacific, we can assume. The dynamic model saying basically the same thing. It says, oh, okay, inactive phase, active phase moving to the solidly over the maritime continent. It's like Bali in that area, but not making it into the West Pacific. So the next 2 weeks from all these charts so far are not looking particularly promising. Here's the upper level model. This shows potential for precipitation. Yellows and oranges, less than normal precipitation, which one can loosely equate with the inactive phase of the MJO. Greens, more precipitation. Roughly, one can equate that with the active phase of the MJO. All right, how do you read this? Well, each panel is 5 days, so the 15th of November, 20th, 25th, you get it. That is South America there, Central America, the equator at 0 right there. Okay, New Guinea is right there, Australia, Philippines. So the Kelvin wave generation area, the West Pacific, right in there. That's where we're interested in. And this looks like inactive phase, continuing through, and eventually sort of just dissipating by the end of November, November 30th. And then a weak active phase supposedly setting up, and it's stumbling very weakly across the Pacific, pushing into Central America a little bit before Christmas, and then a new inactive phase, a little bit more concentrated or coherent, pushing into the West Pacific over the Christmas holidays, according to this model. The CFS model goes out a month. This is down 850 millibars. That's up about, 4,700 feet, I believe. And this is the whole planet on one chart again. Date line right there. So the far west perimeter of the Kelvin wave generation area is somewhere right around in here. And the the east side of it, and the east side of it right about here, 170 west. So clearly, the blues are easterly anomalies. You can see for the entire 1 month forecast, easterly anomalies forecast to be in control of the Kelvin wave generation area. The dotted contour here is the inactive phase of the MJO. It's supposed to be moving through the Kelvin wave generation through about Thanksgiving, the 28th of November. No surprise there that the inactive phase would drive easterly anomalies, and quite strong right in this area here. But also notice easterly anomalies continue through the duration of the model run, even after the inactive phase is moved out. We've talked about this before. This dotted purple line is the low pass filter. It is the indicative of high pressure sitting over the dateline region in the Pacific Ocean. That is the hallmark of La Nina. Right here, the low pressure bias is in the Indian Ocean. Again, another indicator of La Nina. So this model indicating strong easterly anomalies and the inactive phase of the MJO, and even without the presence of the inactive phase of the MJO, easterly anomalies in control through the next month. And then finally, the 3-month CFS model. The forecast is on the top here, past performance is on the bottom. Kelvin wave generation area starting right about here, going the whole way up through the chart to about right here. That's the West Pacific. You see easterly anomalies in control, and then supposedly westerly anomalies building as we get into January. Don't believe this for a second. Some flavor of this has been on the models for 2-3 months now, and it never actually gets here. Or when the active, we can assume this is the active phase since there's westerly anomalies, at least forecast making it across the Pacific. But odds are this will disappear rather quickly and it'll be weak westerly anomalies at best. Let's overlay the MJO, see how close we are. All right, there we are. Right now, dotted contour, inactive phase of the MJO setting up in the Kelvin wave generation area today and expected to continue. So the east end of the Kelvin wave generation area is right about there. So even into December 25th. Inactive phase of the MJO in control, but it starts building in the West Pacific about mid-December and then goes the whole way through December into January till almost the end of January, and then the inactive phase comes in behind that. So the Christmas time frame actually looking pretty promising. The interesting part here is, again, this all looks doom and gloom, massive easterly anomalies, blah, blah, blah. But you notice, looking at the models, there is still activity. Not great activity, not big, powerful storms, but at least something to produce surf. Do not get picky. Take the opportunities you can get and make the most of it, because the suspicion is that east winds, at least, north winds along the California coast and east winds pushing into the Hawaiian Islands are only going to build and get stronger as this La Nina gets further entrenched as we get into winter. So don't expect, great, awesome, clean conditions and epic swell. You just got to take what you can get and hope for the best. All right, then finally, the low-pass filter. Let's do this. We talked about this before. The dotted contour here, high-pressure bias over there's the date line right there. 2 contours today, building to a third contour on mid-December, December 17th, continuing the whole way through into February at least. No big surprise there, with the low-pressure bias in the Indian Ocean building to 2 contours around Christmas time and going to the end of January. Notice that the low-pressure bias is forecasted to make some very minor encroaches into the West Pacific as we get into February. The hope is that this thing all disappears, sometime next summer, but there's no guarantees of that. To be blunt, we'll see. This all looks pretty well entrenched, but we'll see how things play out here as we get deeper into winter. All right, enough the MJO discussion. Let's get into the La Nina El Nino discussion. We've been looking at this chart. This is subsurface temperatures across the Pacific. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. These X's are the anchor lines and sensors on the anchor lines of the TAO buoy array. The sensors pick up the data, use a model to fill in the gaps, and then you find out where your warm and your cold water is. The reds are warm water. They're all off into the West Pacific. In the East Pacific, colder water, or at least cooler water. The warm water is very shallow, and this is pretty typical when you have stronger than normal easterly winds driven by La Nina, creating upwelling. They push all your warm water, sort of the opposite of a Kelvin wave. They push all the warm water off to the west and only leave you with cold water in the east. This is actual water temperatures. It is the anomalies. Differences from normal for this time of year, and this really tells the picture. Your warm water is building now 2 degrees above normal in the West Pacific, making it to, what is that? I think that's 160 west. Yeah, there it is right there, 160 west. So basically a point south of Hawaii, and then all east of there the whole way into Ecuador. Colder than normal water, 3 degrees centigrade below normal. That's about 5 degrees Fahrenheit per this model, with even cooler, light cooler anomalies making it to the date line, if not beyond. Another model, more higher res model, suggesting much the same, but with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we'll say a core down to 5 degrees centigrade below normal. Clearly you can see easterly anomalies are having their toll on the Pacific, creating cooler than normal water subsurface. And then we can look at this from a historical pattern or perspective over the past year. That's December 2019. We're approaching December 2020. This is the West Pacific here. This is the East Pacific here. You see the last Kelvin wave from the last series of warm events traversing the Pacific from December into about February, March of this year. And then the cool water, that's warm water, cool water in the blues, started developing in April of this year. Took a break a little bit in July, and then it's just been nonstop building. Quite cool there in early November. South of 130 west 140, so that's on the equator somewhere west of California, southwest of California. Quite cool. That's where strong easterly winds are blowing, and this is the hallmark of La Nina. Sea surface temperature anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. No big surprise, no change from last week or the week before that or the week before that. Cool anomalies driven by strong easterly winds causing upwelling on the equator. That's Ecuador there, South America, Central America. Notice warmer than normal temperatures above that, but on the equator right there, 0, that's the equator. Much cooler than normal. A little bit of warming along Peru, but not significant. We think as this inactive phase, this is actually a pause in the action, we believe. We've been through, I wouldn't say the active phase of the MJO, but the inactive phase has weakened. We expect as the inactive phase starts building over the next couple weeks, trades are going to only get stronger and temperatures will drop more in this location. The trend over the past 7 days, a little bit of warming here off of Ecuador, but still, it doesn't mean they're warm temperatures. They're just not as cold as they were. Cooling continuing in this area right in here, the blues, you can see that. And then a little bit of warming in pockets, but kind of a weak trend. It's really cold and not getting particularly warmer, but not getting particularly colder either. But we expect more blues to start showing up in this as the inactive phase builds in the Kelvin wave generation area over here. That'll feed easterly winds, and then you get more upwelling. The overview picture, now notice there is a little bit of warming right here around the Galapagos. The temperatures are actually about normal, a little bit warmer than normal. You can see that occurring, the warming setting up right there. We would expect to see that disappear as the inactive phase builds over the Central Pacific and over the Eastern Pacific. We'll expect the depth of the blues along here, and especially down into here, to get deeper over the next 2 to 3 weeks. But we'll see. The models, though, have been pretty good about this. So, right now, yes, this is La Nina, but it doesn't look like end of the world kind of thing. We expect these shades of blue to get much deeper over the next 3 weeks. Sea surface temperature index in the Nina 1.2 region. This is the area right there along the Galapagos, Ecuador, and northern Peru. Temperature's actually coming up. It was down 2 degrees below normal. Today's value, 0.646, a little bit more than half a degree below normal. A half a degree for 5 consecutive months is the threshold for La Nina. We were down way below that. We are coming up a little bit, but we think, again, with the inactive phase building, and these temperatures are going to drop. In the official Nino 3.4 region, this is the area from south of California out to almost the date line. Temperatures have been steadily dropping. They were down to about minus 1.65 degrees. But today, up to just 1.073 below normal. That wouldn't be too bad. But again, we expect these to start falling as well. And then what's the effect of all this on the atmosphere above the ocean? What does the atmosphere think is happening? Well, this is the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Tahiti's in the Pacific, Darwin in the roughly the Indian Ocean. When the index is negative, that suggests lower pressure over Tahiti. Today, it's positive at 9.92 and has been positive. You can see the numbers. Smatterings of negatives here and there for a day or two, but generally positive. The average, the 30-day average, here we go, 3.83. That's not too bad. But again, remember that we think that, you see, it was up to 10 there at one point a month ago, dropping to 3.3. We think that's because the inactive phase of the MJO has been weak and trades have been a little bit, not as strong as they were, so there's been some rebound. Same with the 90-day average, 8.36. Still not quite fully indicative of La Nina. It's been hanging in that range for a month now, but we expect this to start getting much more positive, probably pushing up to 12 or 13 or something like that as we get into December, but we'll see. These are just indicators to keep your eyes on. Here's the 30-day SOI graphed out. You see, so we were on this upward trend July till about a month ago. The downward pulses are like the active phase of the MJO, and the 30-day SOI starts moving towards negative. But we expect with the inactive phase building, this will shoot up and probably be fairly much higher than that, and probably much higher than even that at some point here in the next month, but we'll see. But you can clearly see the trend towards a rising Southern Oscillation Index value, which suggests La Nina. And then finally, the sea surface temperature forecast in the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region. So we're in mid-November, which would be somewhere right about there, probably about right there. This suggests we're at minus 1.35 degrees. I think we're actually a little warmer than that. But the forecast, now this is the good news. The forecast says we're supposed to bottom out at 2 degrees below normal for, a couple of days, somewhere in mid-January. This is the middle of the month here. We were, like even 2 weeks ago, forecast to go down to minus 2.4 degrees. So there's been some softening of the model. The more this softens, the better. That means the better odds of maybe, hopefully, pulling out some sort of a reasonable semblance of winter. But right now, if it gets down to minus 2, that's still a pretty significant La Nina. But the fact that it's softened so much in just a week or two kind of gives us some hope that the model is getting a sense that maybe things won't get as bad as we thought. I mean, the reality is the next 3 weeks are going to be the teller, right? If this inactive phase of the MJO builds as strong as they forecast, and we get easterly anomalies and all that, it's just going to drive water temperatures down. But if it's not as strong as forecast and the models back off, and we end up with something like this, that might not be too bad. As temperatures, as we get into the summer, supposed to just pretty much return to normal, a quarter degree below normal. That's not too bad. But certainly, it suggests not a great pattern for this winter. So the good news is there is something on the charts that suggests the North Pacific is to produce not huge surf, but some surf, rideable surf with probably 13-second period for days on end in varying sizes. Not huge, but again, rideable at exposed breaks, mainly north of Point Conception, something into Hawaii as well too. North winds along the north and central California coast supposed to get blowing pretty good, so we'll have another dip in the water temperature. Trades blowing into Hawaii pretty good as well. A little bit of southern hemi swell for Southern California though, midweek. That might not be too bad. And beyond, well, it looks like La Nina. The good news is maybe, just maybe, it won't dip as cold as was originally forecast. Maybe things will soften up, but we'll know in the next 2 weeks or so. Probably, let's say the end of November, we'll have a much better handle on this, whether it's going to be a strong La Nina or just a medium plus La Nina. The reality is, though, you can still get surf. We've talked about this before. It doesn't mean there isn't going to be surf. The storms won't be as big, they won't be as strong, they won't last as long, and so the swells will be pretty much the same. Bigger distance of between swells in terms of days of less rideable surf, and the swells that do come won't last as long. But honestly, the forecast looks not horrendously bad for the next week or two, so make the most of it. All right, so if you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up, right there on the page. Please subscribe. You'll get automatic notifications, but if you don't want to do that, that's okay too. All the data you've seen tonight is available on stormsurf.com, and also at the top of every page there on the site is a link to the video after we publish it, so you can just look at it that way. And that's kind of it. We're going to try to do this again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.